The following story was originally made known to the world by Danny Two Dogs, a writer who detailed these events in an LPL Player Stories article on Weibo. It was then translated into English a number of times, most notably by iCrystallization for Medium.com. This video is nothing more than an attempt to further spread this incredible, heartbreaking story, so please give credit where it's due to the original authors in the links down below. HuanFeng was born on May 20th, 2001, and from that moment onward he would lead one of the most difficult lives imaginable. His parents raised him in Dongjing, a port city in the Guangxi region of China, but before long, at a time when he was only 12 years old, HuanFeng was abandoned by his parents. For the next 3 years, he'd have to learn how to take care of himself while living completely on his own, how to prepare his own meals, make sure he finishes his schoolwork, get enough sleep every night. He was completely left to fend for himself before he had even become a teenager. But luckily for him, he managed to find a way to survive, and eventually the world did show his life a little kindness. He'd make a few friends at school who'd help him get through some of his worst days, as well as meeting some good teachers who also helped guide him in life when he faced tough decisions. Even the port city he grew up in took care of him in a sense, as anytime his life got too stressful or frustrating, he'd always be nearby a beach where he could go and hear the crashing of the ocean waves, letting them wash his problems away. But maybe the greatest stroke of luck he had came in the form of a computer that his father left behind in his room before moving out, which he mainly used to play League of Legends. And in spite of all the odds and all the hardship he faced, one day this 12-year-old kid would grow up to become one of the best AD carries in the world. Myself, a computer, a school, a classmate. That's enough. I can go on just like that.
HuanFeng is like the future of the LPL, in my opinion. He is going to be like a Jackie Love in the future. Like, this guy, I think, is so individually talented. It's insane.
Imagine for a moment you're a kid again, and all throughout your childhood, your mom constantly asks you, if your father and I separated, who would you choose to be with? That was the reality of Tong HuanFeng's childhood. His parents would constantly fight and bring him into their arguments, asking the poor kid impossible questions that nobody in his situation would ever be able to answer. He'd try to hide in his room playing games to get away from their disagreements, but the walls of the small home they all shared were paper thin and could never really do much. As time went on, things would eventually get worse and worse until it all came to an irreversible head one day. While Tong and his mother were living together, when his father was off away living with his own extended family, one day his mother came home, packed up her suitcase, and left without saying a word. From that moment on, HuanFeng had to learn how to take care of himself while still just in his second semester of middle school. The only outside support he'd receive from family was in the form of 200 won that his father would send him about twice a month. For reference, 200 won is the equivalent of around $29 US. Tong still kept in loose contact with his father over the years, which one year in particular resulted in his dad taking him to a family gathering to celebrate the upcoming New Year. Tong had never felt at home with his father's extended family, so during the celebration, he'd sneak away with two of his cousins to a nearby internet cafe. The place was empty due to the holiday, so the three of them decided to stay there all night long grinding League of Legends, each one of the trio playing one of the three Demacian Bruiser champions, a popular strategy at the time Chinese fans called the Bromance of Demacia. When the sun finally rose and it was time to head back to the party, the three of them trudged along a trail making conversation until one of them remarked off the cuff, "Let's go pro one day." They all agreed to do so, although it's questionable how possible that feat really was. At the time, the three of them were just in Platinum, a long ways off from being anywhere near a professional level in League. But eventually, HuangFeng took those words to heart and began working on improving his play every hour he could. Each morning, he'd wake up at 5 a.m. just to play a game of solo queue before heading off to school, where he'd participate in class until his 2-hour lunch break, which he used as another opportunity to bike home quickly, play a few more games of solo queue, and then return to school again. While in class, he'd work extra hard to finish all of his work, avoiding anything having to be done at home, so when he got back home, he could get back to grinding out matches until around 11 in the evening before going to bed and repeating the process again the following day. All of this while being the sole head of his small household. By the time his school year came to an end, HuangFeng had climbed all the way up to Diamond 1, soon moving to the Chinese Super Server, and then hit Masters hovering around 200 to 300 LP. Amazingly enough, throughout all of this, HuangFeng was also excelling as a student. He reached the top of his class, was eventually placed in honors programs, and had a really bright future in his education if he chose to pursue it, but eventually he came to know what future he really wanted for himself, and halfway through his first year of high school, he'd drop out, deciding now was the time to go pro in League. Upon deciding to pursue professional LoL, HuangFeng immediately began sending his resume off to any and all pro teams he could find, but the responses he received were fairly demoralizing. He'd simply not hear back from most orgs, whereas the ones that did bother to respond only told him he wasn't high enough ranked to join their rosters and to come back when he was better. But eventually he did catch a bit of a break. An internet cafe in Yingshuan, Ningxia had an owner that was interested in starting his own pro League of Legends team and floated an offer for HuangFeng to be the team's starting AD carry. The salary was 3,000 won a month, and with it being his only option, he accepted. Now, Yingshuan is more than 2,600 kilometers almost directly north of HuangFeng's hometown of Dongjing, basically on the opposite side of China. It was a serious distance to move, but this was a serious life decision that had his full confidence. Before Tong left, his father told him, "If you're gonna go pro, then do this properly. If it doesn't work out, come back and join the military." His time on the internet cafe team was a fairly bittersweet experience on reflection. HuangFeng was happy that he was finally able to compete in a semi-professional setting, but he was still caught in a very rough living situation. The team house he now resided in was somehow worse than his old home back in Dongjing. The shower head was broken, it was small and dirty, and there was no place for anyone to wash their clothes. And on top of all of this, his teammates weren't always super encouraging. At one point, a former LPL player joined the team and had a discussion with HuangFeng where he told him straight up, "You can't make it into the LPL. Only a dozen or so people in this world can make it there, so why would it be you?" As demoralizing as all this must have been, HuangFeng seemed to take it in stride, happy to be getting his shot at a competitive environment, and it seemed as though he was about to start his climb to becoming an LPL AD carry here, although there was a little bit of a hiccup. At the start of 2018, China was beginning a new competitive league, the LDL or LoL Development League. This tier of competition was meant to be an academy league below China's LPL that could be used to develop future stars of the game, and qualifiers to compete in one of its 4 regional groups were open to all. Well, HuangFeng and his internet cafe team practiced and practiced for these qualifiers, and after a lot of grinding, they managed to play well enough to qualify for the 2018 opening spring season. Seemingly as if to celebrate, the team then moved into a fancy new villa that was a much better living situation than what they had before. However, it would later be revealed that the owner of this team sold their LDL spot to another organization for cash that he used to move the team into their new living quarters. When he learned of this, HuangFeng left the team and headed back home. This must have been heartbreaking, obviously, for the young AD carry, but he did now have the experience of competition and had proven to himself as well as others that he was good enough to play in the LDL. So before the start of 2018's summer split, an old friend of HuangFeng's named Leon was jungling for a team that needed a marksman. That team was Wu Du, the sister team of Snake Esports. Upon Upon seeing HuanFeng's potential, they offered a starting spot for him on the team, which he eagerly accepted and was now in a position to finally play on stage. After all these years and all this hardship, HuanFeng would finally be able to make a competitive debut in front of everyone as a real professional player, and as luck would have it, he'd get to play his main champion in his opening season game, Draven.
这边亚索有点想开，1Q 闪刮起3个人，这边豹女直接跟上收掉了鲁西安，这边 CQG 打不过了呀，陈炮也是接连倒地，眼前的2万千块，这边鲁西安又被勾到了呀，这边的话鲁西安直接被德莱文给秒掉，
被德莱文的红 buff， 哦，这里又要开团，
开了个蒙多啊，开的不是很好。
蒙多这边的血线没有被秒掉，后续大招血线抬起来，我们看到亚索金塔配合豹女一口门，又是秒掉了这边的卢锡安。这边。
At the end of his first competitive match, HuanFeng finished 6-3-5 on Draven, picking up a win, although sadly Wudu would lose their best of series, dropping the next 2 games. Still, they'd pick themselves back up as the season went on, improving a ton and finishing the year with a 9-5 record, getting 3rd place in the Western region standings. Unfortunately, because they didn't play in the spring season, they didn't have enough qualifying points to make it to the playoffs and ended their season on a somewhat somber note. When all was said and done though, HuanFeng had a fairly good split for his first competitive season on stage. He'd contribute to one of the more successful teams, racking up plenty of playing time and a 60% win rate overall, while playing in a role that's valued very highly in the region with tons of competition out there. That being said, he did have some issues in his play that he would need to work on, namely he ended the split with some of the lowest CS per minute among AD carries in his region, as his mechanics weren't as good as they could be. On top of this, he also had way higher than average deaths per game ratios compared to other AD carries out there, as he was prone to occasionally getting caught out and dying in poor ways with bad positioning and other errors. But he was determined to try and fix any and all problems in his gameplay and began endlessly grinding matches in solo queue to do so. Over the years, he had developed a bit of a habit of working himself to the bone on improving, sleeping less than 5 hours some nights just so he could squeeze in more practice. At this point on Wudu, he began turning his attention to climbing the solo queue ladder on the Korean server, a server whose solo queue environment is known for being the most competitive in the world, almost akin to pro-level scrimmages. By the end of the year, HuanFeng would eventually see the fruits of his labor as he was promoted to Challenger in Korea. That very same day he hit Challenger, Wudu cut him from their team. The end of 2018 saw China winning its very first League of Legends World Championship in the form of Invictus Gaming triumphing over Europe's Fnatic 3-0. That following offseason, their LDL Academy squad, IG Young, was trying to build a sort of super team in China's secondary league. They had recently acquired a jungler who they believed to be an up-and-coming future superstar that they wanted to build a team who could play around him, who was none other than Leon from Wudu. Once again, as this team was building their roster, Leon asked that they consider HuanFeng for AD carry. IGY agreed, and they would end up reuniting the duo. The following spring split, the team was put under a lot of pressure to perform as the coaching staff adopted a strict, almost militaristic approach to training. Each player had goals that were set for them by the team that they were expected to achieve by the end of the split, and although they started off the year strong, finishing 17-7 and 4th overall in the regular season, perhaps it was that added pressure that players were under that contributed to a disappointing early exit in the spring playoffs that followed. As an individual player, HuanFeng did manage to improve his mechanics a lot in this period of time. His CS per minute rose to become one of the highest in the region, but maybe more importantly, his deaths fell to become one of the lowest as he developed much cleaner gameplay, making fewer mistakes overall. But there was still one area of his play that needed improving. He was shy. Growing up having to take care of himself completely alone and being unable to trust or rely on anyone else, that resulted in Tong growing up as a very quiet kid. As smart as he would rarely share his opinions with strangers, which extended to not really sharing his opinions with teammates in League of Legends, which could certainly be a bit of a problem at times in a professional setting. But thankfully, an unexpected savior would come into Tong's life that helped shepherd him to an incredibly bright future. That That savior was a new coach named Gokui. IGY's management was really unhappy with their spring results, so much so to a point where they ditched their old militaristic approach, instead bringing in a new, younger coach that worked on a more emotional level with the players. That coach was Gokui, a former LDL top laner who was recently playing on Oh My Dream just that previous split. Gokui was interesting in the way that he approached managing the team, in that he really worked on building up players' spirits more so than their mechanics. He'd constantly try to remind the players that this wasn't a job that they were in because they fell into it or anything, because friends or family wanted it. It was because they had drive and ambition, and this was something they wanted to do for themselves. The focus of Gokui's coaching seemed to be on building the team's ambition, communication, and teamwork above all else. He was known to encourage team bonding exercises outside of League of Legends, doing stuff like escape rooms to try and help build trust and communication skills between players. This sort of thing had never really happened with this group of guys before, and occasionally they would find themselves freezing up if they got stuck on a particularly hard escape room or something, but Gokui would always encourage them and use the opportunity to draw parallels with League. It's okay, this is a team game, you have to believe in your teammates, we can do this. This player-focused coaching style he employed was a gigantic success, and in particular allowed him to make pretty close connections with HuanFeng. Gokui was almost astounded at how hard he found HuanFeng working, recalling stories of times that the team would be going out to dinner together, everyone excited to have a meal except for HuanFeng, who would decide to stay behind because he believed his mechanics weren't good enough last week, so he wanted to grind an extra 2 solo queue games of practice instead. He is the person who worked hardest on the team. No one else could compare. Before long, HuanFeng continued improving at a drastic rate, quickly developing the mechanics that could easily turn him into the next great LPL marksman. At this point, he just needed to prove himself in the next LDL split to get a shot, and right before the season began, he would be given a little extra motivation to do so. At the midpoint between splits, Leon was promoted to Invictus Gaming's main roster. At the time, HuanFeng couldn't help but feel a little bit of envy for his old friend, who seemingly kept on moving on to greener pastures before himself, but he'd quickly turn that envy into a very healthy motivation. I'll catch up to Leon, I'll carry him. I can't let him carry me all the time. Before the start of the summer LDL split, HuanFeng went to Gokui with a request. Have the team play around me, I'll be the carry, he said, and boy was he right. IGY would finish the summer LDL split with an 18-6 record, getting second in the regular season, and shortly after that crushed the following playoffs to win the summer split. HuanFeng, in a matter of a few splits, went from one of the most underappreciated AD carries struggling to find an opportunity on the outside looking in, to an LDL champion. The next step was to find an opportunity on an LPL team in China's top league, where HuanFeng could finally prove himself against the best in the world, and maybe even make it to international competition one day, but that would be a lot easier said than done. Shortly after winning the LDL, HuanFeng was given a tryout with JD Gaming, who at the time was a middle-of-the-pack LPL team that had recently missed out on playoffs and was looking for a new marksman. The stress and the nervousness he felt during this tryout, though, resulted in him playing pretty subpar, and JDG ultimately passed on signing him, deciding instead to pick up the Korean import Loken. It seemed as though this rejection was the straw that broke the camel's back for a moment. HuanFeng told his coach afterwards that he didn't want to do any more tryouts, period. He felt like he was trash, he was done. All of the stress and the anger and frustration from all the experiences he'd been put through these past few years just came to a head. But thankfully, Gokui didn't let him give up. After a lot of bickering and arguing, he eventually convinced HuangFeng to keep trying out after taking a short break to visit his hometown, which he did, but upon returning afterwards, the rest of his tryouts went equally as terribly, as almost every single LPL team rejected him. But then, right before the transfer window closed, one team saw his potential for what it really was. Suning, a relatively new up-and-coming team in the LPL, gave him a tryout, liked what they saw, and signed HuangFeng to be their starting AD carry for 2020. Suning turned out to be one of the best possible landing spots for HuangFeng. Their top laner is Bin, another young up-and-coming rookie who was playing in the LDL throughout 2019 as well. They share a lot of similarities, the two players, in that they're both young rising stars who are eager to prove themselves, and whose usernames in-game are also just taken from their real-life names. The jungler of the team, SOFM, is Vietnamese, another happy coincidental connection. When HuangFeng first met him, he talked about how he could actually see Vietnam from his hometown. Dongjing sits on the border with Vietnam, which is no more than a small river that separates the two nations. Suning also made a very smart decision in pairing HuangFeng with a veteran support player bot lane in the likes of Sword Art. Coming from the legendary Taiwanese team Flash Wolves, Sword Art is a veteran of the competitive League of Legends scene in every sense of the word. He's been to 5 world championships, making a quarterfinals in 2015, and in the era of Korean dominance, Sword Art and Flash Wolves managed to beat some of the best rosters Korea ever constructed, including the Ku Tigers, Kingzone Dragon X, the Afrika Freaks, and SK Telecom T1 multiple times when these teams were all in their prime. He's no stranger to big moments, so to pair him with the young rookie HuangFeng was a smart idea in that he could provide a nice calming presence, giving perspective, and a partner for the young up-and-comer to rely on if he ever felt the pressure getting to him. Sword Art would even later talk about how he intentionally lowered the level of mechanical intensity he played with so as to instead focus on communication to help with HuangFeng's development, and ever since then they've developed a really nice sort of big brother, little brother kind of bond, with Sword Art always finding himself impressed at how hard his lane partner works. He practices so much. He's that kind of person who really puts his back into it, and every time I see this, I'll think about myself when I just started out as a pro player, not wanting anything outside the game, just thinking about playing better. And here we are in 2020, some 7 years after being abandoned by his parents and living alone, growing up in poverty. It seems like all of HuangFeng's hard work is finally paying off. This past summer split, Suning finished with the highest result the organization has ever had in the LPL, reaching 4th place in the 17-team league and capping off their regular season by beating the defending world champions FPX.
In the final game, in the final series of the 2020 summer split, Suning show up absolutely ginormous.
HuangFeng led his team to not only a great summer split finish, but was also able to lead them far enough in the playoffs and the regional finals to qualify as China's #3 seed at the 2020 World Championship. A long way to come since his humble beginnings. Even today, HuangFeng remains a fairly shy and introspective person. He's known for sometimes taking a subway trip around wherever he is, getting off at each spot, and just wandering around a bit so he can have some time alone with his thoughts. He craves that kind of time and opportunity to himself, especially when his life is crazy and chaotic. But no matter where he goes, no place out there can calm him like the ocean side of his hometown. After going pro, whenever I'm feeling anxious, as long as I go to any place related to the sea, I'll feel at ease. He remains one of the most incredible and inspiring stories that exists right now in the world of League of Legends, but one thing I think to take away from this story, maybe more so than anything else, is at the time of making this video, he's still only 19 years old, and likely has a lot more he'll accomplish in the future. When Danny Two Dogs finished his original article and posted it online, HuangFeng reached out to him and said, "Your story has an end, but my esports story will only end when I become the best player in the world." Thank you very much for watching my documentary. If you'd like to support my channel and see me make more of these videos in the future, please consider pledging to my Patreon. But above all, please again give credit to Danny2Dogs and iCrystallization by supporting them on their social media accounts as well as with their articles in the links down below.